know you're all excited. It's ASP.NET time. It's from 10 to 11. I'll be done before 11 o'clock. I'm going to go over chapter 13 right now, which is on how to use SQL data sources. So I promise I'll be done no later than 11. If I don't finish it for some reason by 11, I'm done anyway. All right, so you'll have the rest of the period for lab. It is lab in Java today, and in PHP we're going to do a program as a class. All right. So we're on around page 400. As it says in this chapter, you'll learn more about using the SQL data source. We used it back in chapter 4, but very little to nothing was explained about it. Now, the good news is when you look at this chapter, this is the app. Okay? And this is what they explain throughout the chapter. So when we run this app and you take a quick look at it, or maybe not such a quick look at it, what they're doing here is they're going through the categories table, and so you can choose a category, and once you choose the category, it shows you all of the products that are associated with that category. So there's all your costumes, your masks, your props, and your special effects. Okay, I'm not even going to say now, does that make sense? Because we'll talk about it later on in class. But what I do want to show you about this, all kidding aside, there's the code. What does that mean? There ain't none. This is the file you automatically get generated for you. So this application was created with 0 lines of code. There is no code in there whatsoever. All right. Once you want to go through and start customizing the way this looks, you'll have to add code. But if you're cool with the way that it looks, all right, and limited functionality, you could do it with basically no code whatsoever. So they talk about the SQL data source in here and the data connection. Then they also get into talking about custom statements and stored procedures. What a stored procedure is you take some SQL and you save it in a file. All right, so that you're able to run it over and over again. It's kind of like a script. Then they get into talking about the Datalist Control, data binding, and then at the end, in the last 7 or 8 pages, they show you the code and how they got to the program that I just showed you. All right? One thing to realize, they mention this here on the top of page 400 is the author says here, just as in chapter 4, all of the apps in this chapter and in the rest of this section use the Microsoft SQL Server 2012 Express Local DB database engine that comes with Visual Studio. And that's important when you start looking at this because there are different options that you have available to you. And again, the author will explain those. All right, so if you want to see how it works, that's it. There's not really a whole lot in this program either, because if I go to the ASPX file, what do we have there? We have a drop-down list. All right, we've got a label, it looks like, or maybe that's just static text, a drop-down list, an SQL data source, all right, a data list, and another data source. That's everything. What the data source has to do here is it basically has to hook up so that the system knows that that drop-down list, so if I look in here, it has to know that there is a data source connected, associated with this. And in English, that's the data source. It looks really kind of ugly, but it says you're using the local copy and that you want to attach from your app data folder Halloween.mdf. That's what that's all saying. And the good news is when you go through this stuff and you follow the steps in the book, that all gets created for you automatically. The only thing that you had to do right there was literally change the name, because by default the name's not going to be Halloween connection string. By default the name will be SQL connection string. And if you create another one, it'll be SQL connection string 2. And another one, SQL connection string 3, etc. So when you go through and you create the connection string, this is what gets created for you. If you see where I'm putting the mouse back and forth there, that gets created for you automatically. Then you go in and you choose what you want to have printed. So in this case, as you can tell, category ID, long name, from categories, order by long name. That's all you're going to get. All right. Am I right in assuming that by now when you look at this right here, again, I'm on page 401, I guess, you all understand what ID means. You all understand what run at means. The connection string, again, is going to be built for you by default. And you'll typically tell it the system you want to save it in the web.config file. All right. The provider name, again, is provided for you by default. It'll be system.data.sql client. And the select command is this. All right. So how to choose a data source type? If you look right here. So if I come back into the program right here, okay, and just to show you this, I'm not going to save this or anything, but I'm going to come over here into my toolbox. Oops. And I don't want a standard tool. I don't want a validation tool. These are data tools. So I want to add an SQL data source. So I'm just going to grab this and drag it over here. Boom. And it created a brand new data source right there. And then it asked me if I want to configure it. All right, so I'll go to configure data source. And it says, well, what data connection should we use? When you click here, if there's nothing there whatsoever, if it's the first one you create, it'll come back and say new string. We've already got one that says Halloween connection string, which means connect to the Halloween database. So I click there. And I click next. And now it's thinking about it. There, the system wants to know, what do I want to do? This should look kind of familiar to you. I went one too far. But if I want to, for example, if I want everything from the invoices table, all right, I can specify columns from table or view. I can go to invoices, and if that's checked right there, it'll give me everything. Select star from invoices. If I only want the invoice number, the order date, the subtotal rather, and the total. Notice how it's writing the query for me down here. If I want to put a where condition on there. So I want to, then if I can come in here and say where what. All right. Where I can say, for example, total greater than, you know, and I can, if I want, if I've got another field, I can choose that field. But if I say none here, I can put a value in here. So when it's greater than 1,000, as an example. All right, I can tell it to add it, and notice what it puts. And if I say OK, it wrote the stuff for me. Does that make sense? This is very powerful in here. And in many ways, this is like the access class. Because in access, you do a lot of picking and choosing from the different menu options, etc. All right. I was talking to the first year people, and they were talking to me about their tests they had in access, which I don't like anyway because I don't give tests. But, and I said, how was the test? And they said, oh, it wasn't bad. We had to go into Visio. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about everything that's wrong with this story. Okay? But Denny's teaching it, and Denny's teaching to his strengths. I understand that. I don't belittle him at all for doing that. I have no idea why Visio has to be a part of that class. None. And that is one of the 2 classes I'm going to push it through again to our curriculum committee. I'm trying to get the school to remove the relational database design class and the advanced Java class. Advanced Java, and once they're gone, then we'll have an advanced iOS class and advanced Android class. That's what I want. I've been fighting this battle for 2 years. 2 years ago, in fall, I went to our advisory committee, and they all said, this sounds great. We 100% support it. Everybody did except the people in our administration who have to make the decisions to sign off on it. And the problem with it is if they remove the relational database design class, that's one less class that they could have an adjunct or somebody else come in and teach. Okay. All right, so I can come in here and I can do whatever I want. I can build the query for me automatically. I can tell it to do an order by, or I can sort on up to 3 fields. So I can sort on total in descending order, then on card number in ascending order, etc. And you see it's building everything for me. I click OK. All right, and if I click advanced, everybody see the stuff that's here? As long as when I choose the stuff over here, invoice number is the primary key. As long as I choose the primary key over here, this is going to be bright like this. If I don't choose the primary key as part of this, it'll be gray just like this is. And what this means is, boom, automatically come in there and generate for me insert, update, and delete statements without me having to write any code. I can go back and modify those if I want to, but it'll automatically create those for me. All right, if I use optimistic recovery, what it says is, again, if I happen to be using this copy of SQL Server and it's being used on a server, all right, that don't have any concurrency conflicts. So if I open up a file to start doing stuff with it, and John opens up the same file, and John attempts to save, he's going to get an error message until I close. You know, basically I've got the equivalent of a lock on there. All right, so if I click OK and say next, I can test the query. All right, and it's probably because I put all that garbage in there, but I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to back up one. And where we've got this where condition in here, I'm just going to remove it. Boom. Okay. So I removed it. It's back to just this. All right. I'm going to click next. Try to test it now. See what I get? I didn't write any code. So for every single thing that's in there, and I'm not sure why it didn't like the where condition. I screwed up someplace. But I've got for every invoice that's in there, I've got the invoice number. All right, I've got the order date, the subtotal, and the total. And you may or may not have noticed, but I told it to order it by total in descending order. So I've got all that without me having to write a lick of code. Boom. And you can say, well, how come it's 4 decimal places? It's no big thing. What we learn later on in the chapter is how you can go in and modify that. You can go in and tell it how many decimal places you want. You can put the date in a different format if you want. All right, so there's a lot of different things that you can do with it. Click finish, boom, that's it. Now, nothing's wired up to this right now, so it's not going to do anything. All right, but if I come through here and as an example, okay, so I'm gonna go and grab another one of these controls from the toolbox. So I'm going to tell it that I want we'll use another data list, and I'll drop it right there. No, it's not a data list. Sorry. That was. All right, and I'm going to come in here and choose my data source. All right, and that's SQL Data Source 3, the one I just put in. Okay, and you can see what's in there right now. Boom. It doesn't look like much, but if I go and run my program again, I've written no code. That's the key thing. No code. So now I've got all that information like this in a data list. All right. You know, this is a data grid up here, which is a little bit nicer to look at, but I just put it in there to show you that there's different controls that you could use. All right. And again, like I said, that's the key thing is I haven't written any code. That's what this chapter talks about. So when we went in there and we said what connection to use, again, if there's nothing in there, or if I don't want to use the Halloween.mdf connection, I can click new connection. And if I do, I get this right here. What you're going to choose 100% of the time if you're using an SQL Server database is database. In the past, we've had problems getting this to work. It appears to be working fine now, but we've had problems with it, and we had to go back to Access, and I had to port all that stuff over into an Access database, and it worked just fine. What if what I have isn't a database? All right. Or what if it's some other kind of database? What if it's an Oracle database or something else, some, MySQL or whatever? I can choose object. And if it's not a database whatsoever, I can choose XML file if it's that, or I can choose link. Line item query. And you saw how simple it was. I just dragged it over. Boom. And basically, I let it create the connection for me. These are your possibilities. As you'd probably guess, if you were using Oracle, you'd go here. If you were using Access, you'd go here. The one here that says Microsoft SQL Server means you're physically hooked up to a database server. Not the one that's built into the machine you're using, but a server. All right? So the one we'd use 100% of the time would be Microsoft SQL Server database file. And if you forget, the description is given off to the side here. Now, what does this mean? Somebody tell me, what does this mean right here? The fact that what's checked, so to speak, is Windows authentication. What does that mean? Well, yes and no. What it means is once you're logged into Windows, you can get to this database. If you choose the other one here, the use SQL Server authentication, they'd have to log in again. So it would be possible you could give them a different password, for example, to be able to use the database. So they might be logged in as themselves, but if you set up the SQL Server authentication, then they might be able to get in as administrator, for example. All right. Okay. Yeah, that's the second part of your question was better. Is it problematic? I've tried to get it to work with MySQL. I followed all the steps, and everything looks fine until you run it, and then it doesn't like it. Now, I haven't tried with this new version we have, but I tried it in 2010, I tried it in 2012, and I couldn't get it to work. Again, the first time you create a connection, the Change Data Source dialog box is displayed. You tell it what provider you want, and these are the ones I just mentioned to you. What you can also do when you do this, you may or may not have noticed, but again, when I came through here and I did this and I said configure data source, okay, and we said next, we did all this stuff, boom, come on. Okay, so we have done all this already. So notice if I change it, it has no idea of knowing what it is I want to do. Okay, so if I come back here now to my categories and I choose everything, click it, and I test a query, notice what's changed. That's all it's going to show me. That makes sense? It only shows me what I tell it to show me. And if I say now, okay, when I go through here and I do this, this has already been saved. Yeah, it says, do I want to reset the template? Because it's all the stuff down here. And if I say yes, see how it fixed it for me, so to speak? All right. So now if I run this again, still no code. This is going to be a lot smaller because there are only 3 or 4 categories. Oh, I changed the big one. Sorry. Changed the wrong one there. All right. That's no biggie. I'm not going to keep this anyway. So. What happens when you get all done? All right, is it's going to ask you if you want to save this to the web.config file. Always check yes. Everybody hear that? Always check yes. Because then it writes this right there out to web.config. And what's nice about putting something like that out on the web.config is literally if you go and you take the file and you've got it on your own machine or the whole project and you move it over to a regular server, if you change that line, the web.config file, you don't even have to recompile it. All you have to do is put the right connection string in there. And they mention that here, it's always best off to do it that way. All right. Then they talk about how to create a select statement. I'm not going to go through this because, again, you've seen this kind of stuff before. Everyone in this room knows how to create a select statement. Okay. You can add a where clause again to it. Now notice how this changes. This looks different. All right. So even if you're only half paying attention, I guess that's better not paying attention at all. But if you are half paying attention, if you take a look here, this is on page 411 of the book. Notice how you have to set this up. This, if you look at the example that's on the screen right here, all right? What this example, I'm going to take the headphones off. But what this example right here on the screen is saying is, all right, I want the category ID in my drop-down list to be equal to, sorry, this is the category ID in the database. I want that equal to the drop-down list value. Remember when we first ran this and it showed on there, it had the different categories, and if I chose costumes, it showed me all the things under the costumes? That's what we're doing right here. Because by default, if you don't put a where in there, it shows you everything. Now I'm going to have a drop-down list and I don't put anything in there. I'll still have the drop-down part, but it'll show me every record that's in there for everything. It won't siphon them off. So by using the where condition like we've done right here, this will make sure that when I choose a category here, it tells the system, oh, okay, that's the category that we're using, so only give me stuff that's equal and underneath that category. All right, so where that category name is set for that one. So again, I have no idea if I can fix this, but I'm going to try. You know, it never stopped me anyway. So this is what? All right, so what did we want here? We wanted categories, and we wanted, what did we want to retrieve from the database? I think we wanted everything, the category ID, the short name. Let's take a look in here and see what it was. We want the category ID, the long name, and the category. All right, so that's everything. Boom. Now if I go to where, and I go down to the column and I say where what? Where category ID is equal to control, and what control? The drop-down list, category. That's all I have to do. All right. I click add. Okay, I say okay, I go to next. That's what it's going to look like now because it has no idea what I'm looking for. All right, I'll tell it to finish. Now hopefully I fixed it and didn't screw it up, but it's possible that I did. I don't know. All right, this doesn't look good right now, but we'll take a look anyway. In fact, I know it's wrong because I wanted everything. So let's go back and change it one more time. Let's configure that data source one more time. Next. And what we want to do is we want to come in there to the, let's try products. All right. Product ID, name, short description, unit price, and on hand. I'll put those in there. Where, but I want to do the same thing. Where that category ID is equal to control of the drop-down list category. All right, add, okay, next, finish. Again, hopefully I made it better and not worse, but it's so easy to go back and reconfigure this stuff. That's what's nice about it. All right, so I'm going to come back in here, I'm going to run it again. Again, I might have totally hosed it. I don't know. Application is currently offline. Not sure why I got that. I think I might have another version of it already running, so try that again. The application is currently offline. To enable it, remove the okay. Let's do this. Let's do a file. Let's close the solution and not no, hell no, we won't save anything. This is what I wanted to show you right here. Okay, so again, if I come over here and come back down here and configure the data source, you already saw all this stuff. It was already all set up for me. Everything was set up. Okay, but the idea is in here, what I told it was every time I change what's in here, have what's in here change as well. Does that make sense? And I noticed it did save everything I did last time. So let's take a look and see what it looks like. So there's costumes. There's masks. See that? There's special effects. Now I did save out there on the system on the P drive for the class. I saved the one from chapter 13. It's out there on the with the folder with today's date on it. So that one's correct. I've kind of hosed this one up, but all right. Starting on page 412 is where it gets a little hinky. And what I mean by that is this is about as heavy as it gets in here. And I'm going to go over it, but I'm going to go over it fairly quickly. Notice what it says. When you create a where clause, the wizard creates select parameters for you. So again, this stuff is all created for you by using that wizard that I just showed you. So all that stuff that you see in here, select parameters, parameter, control parameter, query string parameter, form parameter, session parameter, profile parameter, cookie parameter, and route parameter get filled in for you automatically. And if you don't fill them in, they go to whatever their default value is. That's all I'm going to say about it. All right? You can see an example of it right here. All right. How to use custom statements? Again, we already looked at this a little bit. Remember when I showed you that box and it said generate, insert, update, and delete? All right, and if you check that, it set those up for you. Well, this is what gets generated as something that looks like this. That's the select. The update would be similar, the insert would be similar, and the delete would be similar. But it is possible when you go in there, if you don't like that, you can click the Query Builder button. If you click the Query Builder button, you get this. Everybody, please just quickly look on the screen here. All right. It's broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4 areas. You can make any of them as big or as small as you want them to be. The diagram pane has your tables. So you can literally, if you've got 10 tables, you could drag all of them out there. As soon as you check a field, the fields that you check end up going in here, in the grid pane. All right? And the ones that you've actually checked go into writing that SQL statement. All right? And then it shows you the actual result pane. It's like when you click that test query button. So you can go in and, again, you can play with this stuff. It's not hard to do. And it's another way that if you knew Access, but you didn't really understand MySQL, or you didn't understand SQL Server, you could probably help teach yourself by going through and doing this. All right. So they talk in here about using and defining these parameters. Well, if you're going to make this a little bit more difficult, so to speak, the system needs to know everything that you're working with. So you can set up a parameter, you can basically tell it what control to link it to, and you can even, if you want to, you can even give it a default value. John, that fly had a child and it's flying around in here right now. Now, what I showed you before, somewhat accidentally, is what starts on page 420, and that's the Datalist Control. The Datalist Control allows you to create something that looks like this. And you can format it any way you want. You notice that when I put that data list out here just a minute ago, notice how these things are all on separate lines? All right, there's 4 fields there: invoice number, order date, subtotal, and total. All right, but I can go back in there. What ends up happening when I create this is what's called a template gets made. I can go into that template and change anything I want. So if I wanted each one of these, so let's say that I wanted the subtotal and the total to be on the same line and both of them to be formatted currency with 2 decimal places. I can do that by going in and just tweaking the template. It's really not that difficult to do. You know, my litmus test is if I can do it, I don't know any reason why you couldn't do it. All right? So they explain this in here. Again, all it needs is the ID to run at and the data source that you're binding it to. So as it says, a data list displays a list of items from the data source it's bound to. To define the information, you create 1 or more templates. And you can play with the templates and do whatever you want to do with them. Unfortunately, this is what they look like. Not only that, you literally get at least 3 templates. You get a header template, you also get a body template, and on the bottom you get a footer template. So if you decided for some reason for every single record you wanted something special at the bottom, you could put it in a footer template. Header is where you can go and move around. So notice in here, we've got all 4 of the fields on the same line. Okay? And then we move all the other stuff on the same line as well. Okay. Again, you can format all this stuff. It gets kind of ugly, but once you've done it once or twice, it's really not that difficult. And if you click format, so in other words, if I click format and it'll allow me to pick a field in here, and I can say, for example, so this will change a little bit, but it'll be field type, and if I choose currency, boom, $, commas, decimal points. All that stuff is put in for me automatically. And it ends up, for lack of better words, again, writing the code for you. All right, you already saw that, so again, if I come back in here, all right, and I look at this, and I do a file, and I say edit templates. See what I get? Not really nice, all that nice looking, but if I move this out of ways, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of these, and I'm going to put that over here, just for right now. Put that over here, and I'm going to put that over here. Why? So I can start moving these things. Okay, so I can come over here. I don't like the way it says unit price, so I want to make my own. On hand, I want a space there between product and ID. So what do we have? I probably already screwed up the name, so I think that what's next is short description. Okay, so there's my product ID. There's my name. There's my short description. There's my unit price. This is going to look really funky when I get done with it, but it'll be fine anyway. There's my on hand. All right. Even though it went over to the next line, it should all still be on the same line. All right. I'm going to go and save that. And stop the run and start the run again. As always, if I screwed up, it's going to let me know. I mean, literally. So you see how I changed all of it? Product ID, name, short description, unit price, etc. See that? Looks a lot uglier than it did before. Still functions, still works. So I'd have to work with it to tweak it a little bit to make it look the way I wanted it to look. All right. And again, when I do this, and I come back in here, and I stop the run, again, when I come in here and start playing with the different stuff that's in here in the templates, let's see, display item template. Okay, yeah, that's what I want. Okay, so now I can come back in here and I can go into, it's the property builder or not. No. Yeah. Format. All right, and I can sit there and I can, for instance, I can put in alternating types of things. It's been a while since, like I said, since I've looked at this. I should have. Didn't beforehand. But I can come in here and I can grab any field that's in here. So I should be able, for example, to come into the unit price. All right. And, well, that's what it's bound to. I don't remember, sorry, where it is right now, but there's a way that I can go in here and just change the way that it's formatted to make it look the way I want it to look. All right. And that is explained in here. Data binding says how to bind a list control to a data source. Well, again, what this is saying is, all right, this data source, this particular field is going to be bound to this particular field. You're doing a mapping. And if you just choose accordingly, it's all done for you. If you don't like it, you can go into the template and you can make some changes to it also. This is what I just showed you. Now, why it's not showing the same stuff, I don't remember. All right. But that's what I wanted, was field binding in the format. I thought that I had that, but it didn't look like it showed. So when I went into here, there's the format. All right. Currency, boom. So unit price is now set to currency, and I think that might be all we need. But let's look at it now. Again, I'd still have to fix it, but let's see now if I get the dollars and cents and the commas, etc. There they are, and it's back to 2 decimal places. All right. This is the code that's happening behind the scenes. Anybody tell me where else you have seen that word before? JavaScript has an eval also. In fact, you can go out and Google JavaScript eval is evil, because people tell you that you shouldn't use it, because one of the things you can do with it is you can do math with strings and a lot of other stuff that you really shouldn't be allowed to do, because JavaScript allows you to do it. All right? It's kind of doing the same thing in here. But again, unit price, basically it's doing an eval and it's binding the unit price, so it's telling you that by default that should be currency. And in this case with 0 decimal places. All right, so the end of the chapter, these are the last 7 or 8 pages starting on page 430. What the author does is goes through this example that I've been butchering throughout class, this one, right here. And again, I could care less that I made all those changes to it. You know, I'm not going to save it anyway. All right. Now, it mentions in here, again, there's no C# code. Although this is a simple app, even complicated apps that insert, update, and delete can often be written with little to even no code. It is possible for you to create for yourself a very simplistic setup, all right, where you literally have a fully functioning relational database management system with little to no code. All right. I wrote one of these once, and I think we had like 6 lines of code in it, and it did just about everything you could think of. Now again, if you wanted to come back and say, are you sure you want to do this, etc., and you want to check before it goes into the database to make sure it's in the right format and that you're not allowing JavaScript in, etc., that's going to require code. All right. In the next couple chapters that we'll go over next week, there's code. Okay. So again, the product list app uses 2 SQL data sources, one for the category for the drop-down and the other for the display that you see down here. So there's one there's one SQL data source down here and one down here. Okay. As it says, this is bound to the second data source control that displays the data for the products. The application requires no code. So it's just the ASPX file. And they show you this up on page 433. And the author is even good enough that what he does in here is he said the stuff that's basically new, all right, the stuff that you'd have to worry about, so to speak, That's in gray. So there's the drop-down list. You can see that it's set up with a data source. There's the data source itself. There's the data list and the data source that it's connected to. These are the different, they put the stuff in here. Basically, it's in there as a table. But this in here is very similar to the stuff that I just showed you. All right. Now, the rest of the stuff, we talked about most of it already, because they explain in here what that generate, insert, update, and delete statements is. I already showed it to you. But again, if you want that thing not to be grayed out, first of all, if this is grayed out, so is that. Okay? I don't think it's possible to have use optimistic concurrency if you don't have generate, insert, update, and delete statements. Because otherwise, all you'd be allowing the person to do would be to read it with a select statement. So it wouldn't make sense. But this only will be checked, not checked, this will only be non-grayed out, blackened like it's shown here, if one of the fields that you chose in your query is the primary key field. That's the mistake most people make. Oh, I don't need the primary key, so I won't show it. And if you don't show it, it won't automatically generate these for you. Okay? You have to. It's a goofy rule that Microsoft set up. And again, all this stuff then that you see right here, this is all code on the bottom of page, not code, but I guess ASPX code on the middle of page 435. We didn't do anything. If you just follow the instructions that are in here, you can build this with no code. And when I say no code, no C# code. All right. Finally, they talk a little bit about caching. We've hit on caching before. As it says, ASP.NET's caching feature lets you save the data retrieved by a data source in cache memory on the server. By default, it usually is set up to about a half an hour. And if it's more than that, typically what you'll do is you'll send a message to the system, go out and check the database. It's been a half an hour to see if it's changed. As always, if it's a product like Amazon, you're not going to set it to 30 minutes. You might set it to 30 seconds. Especially if you've got where you're selling used products and you only have a limited number of them. So if you want to work with caching, these are the 3 things that you see here, 4 things. On the middle of page 437, you have to enable it, set its duration. Notice with the expiration policy, if it's set to absolute, the timer is started the first time data is retrieved and not set to 0 until the time is expired. If you set it to sliding, it's reset to 0 every time you retrieve data. All right, that doesn't make a lot of sense, so absolute is the default. And finally, for the cache key dependency, as it says, it's a string that provides a key value associated with the cache data. But again, all that stuff is created for you automatically. All right. You don't have to write the associated code. So next class on Tuesday of next week, we're going to go over Chapter 14, how to use the grid view. Okay? Just as a little primer for you, just so you see this, I'll go right back to my program again. All right. And I'm going to go back here, and where I've got this other data source that we created, I don't remember which one we did last, probably number 3. Okay. So I'm going to fix that in just a second, but I'm going to go back to that control right there. I'm removing it. All right. I'm going to go back to my toolbox, and again, under data, all right, I'm going to find grid view, and I'm going to drag it in. Can you already tell what a grid view kind of looks like? Sort of looks like a spreadsheet. I'll click the auto format, and we'll use a different one, Ocean, on here just so you can see it. All right, okay. And we'll associate it with the same one as we've got up here. That's fine. So I'll associate it with, no, I guess we did have the second one down here. Number 3, that's fine. All right. Notice we can tell it to, we want to enable paging, sorting, editing, there's the edit button, deleting, there's the delete button, etc. Selection, okay. So what have I done? I've just clicked a bunch of options. I'm going to do a file save, and I'm going to run it. So that grid view is going to be created for us, again, no code in there. So there's the grid view. All right. If I want, I can edit that particular So now I can come in here. I can't edit the invoice number, but I can edit the end order date or the subtotal or the total. All right, if I don't want to, I can cancel it. I can click delete, but then it's literally going to remove it. So if I click delete, all right, it says that there's an error in the application. Why? Because I'm trying to remove something and there's another table that depends on that. All right, so I'm removing it from the wrong table. But you can see there's no work on my part. I get, again, there's what, 1026, etc. That's everything. So if I click another number, now I've moved. If I decide I don't want all that stuff, I can come back in here then. And again, all I have to do is click on here. You know what? I don't want enable selection. Boom, it's gone. I don't want to allow you to delete it. I only want to give you the ability to edit it. In fact, I don't even want to let you edit it. You have just select permissions. All right, so if I go back and save it again and run it again, as you know, I still haven't put any code in. All right. Also, notice on here, since I said that allow for sorting, notice if I click on total, now it's in ascending order. If I click again, descending order. If I click again, subtotal ascending, subtotal descending, order date ascending, order date descending, and of course invoice number ascending, invoice number descending. All that makes sense? With no code. So that's what we're going to look at in the next class period. So we'll go over the grid view on Tuesday of next week. Then on Thursday, we'll go over chapter 15, which is the details view and the form view. Then the following week, we'll do 16 and 17, which are the list view data pager. And probably we're going to skip 17, which is on object data sources. All right, so 2 weeks from today, I'm going to go over model view controller with you. That's chapter 24 in the book. So 2 weeks from today, we're done with this book. All right, and the rest of the period, or the rest of the semester, we're going to be working on an ASP.NET model view controller architecture program as a class. Yeah. By default, it uses SQL Server. But again, you can have it use just about anything you want. Right? But here's a surprise. Microsoft products work best with Microsoft databases. That's all I got.